When we went overseas, I wanted to tell people about Jesus. I wanted to lead people to Jesus. I wanted to make disciples. I wanted to see churches start. But actually, before I went, I'd never led anyone to the Lord. And here I am, this so-called professional evangelist now. I'd never even seen a house church, let alone planted one. So do I have the skills to do what God is asking me to do in that country? Absolutely not. But one thing I do know is that when I saw fruit, and I did see fruit quite quickly with people coming to faith in Jesus, it had to be God that did it.
Hi guys, welcome back to Raw Mission. I'm Matt, your host, and today my colleague Mike and I are going to be doing some myth busting, exposing some half-truths and misunderstandings about global mission and about those who are sent out. Why? Well, we know from scripture that we have an adversary who prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to destroy. And we also know that he's a subtle deceiver, a twister of truth, and that he would love ordinary Jesus followers to ignore or disqualify themselves from obeying the Great Commission, those commands of Jesus to take the Gospels to the ends of the earth. Good morning, Mike. It's fantastic to be back in the studio with you for another slightly different episode where we're going to do a top 10 myths about missions and missionaries. Mike, why are we doing this particular episode about myths?
Well, as we speak to churches and individuals who are thinking about doing missions overseas, we've come across quite a lot of misunderstandings, sometimes even lies about missions. And so we just thought it's good for people to hear what God's perspective is on missions and our part in it.
Yeah, we meet so many people, don't we, who are thinking about mission, wanting to go or to send others, to give, and it's fantastic. But we know there are many hindrances. There are many blockages that cause anxiety or hesitation. And people think, well, is this the right thing to be getting involved with? So we really hope that this episode will encourage those who are on this path and on this journey and just silence some of those voices that might be holding them back. Well, we've got 10, and we're breaking it down, I think, into 5 myths about mission and 5 myths about missionaries. So our first one is this idea that there are churches all over the world that the job is done. The Great Commission is complete. I mean, every nation surely has some Christians and has some churches. So really, do we need to keep sending folks around the world to preach the gospel?
Well, the good news is, there are probably gatherings of Jesus followers in almost every country of the world. And that's an amazing thing that we're living 2,000 years after Christ. The gospel's gone right to the ends of the earth. But what we have to realize also is that the call for the Great Commission started with Abraham. And when God called Abraham, he said, through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And then when Jesus sends out his disciples, he says, go and make disciples of all ethnic groups. And then the end will come, as it says in Matthew 24. And so when we look at the world through that kind of perspective, have we reached every country? Yes, as we define countries marked on a map. But have we reached every ethnic group? Have we reached all the families of the earth? Not yet. I was just reading yesterday, there was a group of mission agencies that came together back in 2001, and they formed this kind of alliance called Vision 5-9. And at the time, they looked at the number of totally unengaged Muslim people groups. That's Muslim people groups where there's literally nothing happening. There's no efforts to actually reach those people. And back at that time, 2001, they identified 2,700 unengaged Muslim people groups. Mm-hmm. And just recently, they've relooked at it, and it's down to about 380, from 2,700 down to about 380. So the good news is that the gospel, the good news of Jesus, is gradually reaching all the ethnic groups of the world, but there's still much to do. There's still large areas of the world where there's nothing going on.
Yeah.
Every summer, I take a group of young people to somewhere in the Muslim world where we go to towns or cities where there is nothing. There's probably not a believer, let alone a church. These are the areas that we still need to keep on reaching.
Yes, there are no believers there are no churches there, but also there are no workers, right? There's no one trying to even bring the gospel to those towns and cities or ethnic groups. And you mentioned that incredibly encouraging statistic about unengaged Muslim people groups. But there is a distinction as well between unreached and unengaged, isn't there? And that's just the Muslim groups we're talking about. So there are still huge numbers. And some of those unengaged Muslim people groups, they number in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. So there's still a lot to be done. Yeah, so we thank God for the victories, but we know there's still so much more to do. Large parts of the world where there's very little happening. Even in some places around the world, the capital city might have some believers in it, but there'll be so many towns, villages where the gospel is completely unknown and nobody's really out there sharing. Okay, so the second one is there are too many needs around us. Look at the UK, look at the USA or Europe or Canada, Australia, Korea, Philippines. We might get overwhelmed with the fact that there are so many people here who don't know Jesus. And we often hear this, don't we, Mike, from folks coming to us and church leaders, but there's just too much to do around us here. We can't think about the ends of the earth and unreached people groups out there. So how do we tackle that one?
Well, there is some truth in that, and there's always truths in some of these myths. Yeah, there's a lot of need, but also that there are more than enough Christians in the UK and the United States and places like that. There are more than enough Christians to deal with the needs around us. You could say everyone in the UK at some point in their life will meet a follower of Christ. Everyone in the UK will probably walk or drive past several churches every week of their lives. But there are still large areas of the world, like we said in the first myth, where the gospel hasn't gone yet. In our little district of the city we were living in, there were almost 500,000 people living there and probably not one follower of Christ when we were there. So, yeah, there's need, but it's sometimes just a question of numbers. Probably the same for you in Pakistan, where you went.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, where we were, there were probably 2 million people just up in the mountains where we were, a very small part of Pakistan, but hardly any believers up there, local believers. And I think, yeah, you're right. There are so many churches in our nation and in the Philippines and in Korea and in Brazil and Argentina and so on. We can reach those around us. I looked up one time how many churches just in Oxford, the city of Oxford, down the road from us. And there was something like 50 churches, and there are probably more than that actually, but even just sort of 50 active happening churches just in Oxford. And so you think about London, how many hundreds and hundreds, or Birmingham. And so, yeah, the places we're talking about, real unreached cities, there would be no church. And that's such a difference, isn't it? So we have to respond to where the need is the greatest. And I think the other thing is, even if there are needs all around us, when Jesus sent out his disciples to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, he didn't say, wait until everyone is saved in Jerusalem before you start tackling Judea. And when Judea is covered and everyone believes, then go out to Samaria and work with the Samaritans and so on. It's never wait, finish this, and then go. It was all at the same time. We can do our neighborhoods and the nations, and every church can have a vision for that and have an impact, can't they?
Yeah. And if you're listening to this and you've had thoughts about going overseas, going to the unreached, I would just encourage you to keep on pursuing that. There'll always be 100 reasons not to go. There will always be 100 good causes around you that you can get involved with. But actually, if you've thought about going to the nations and going to the unreached especially, it's not you that came up with that thought. It's probably because God put it on your heart in the first place. And the reason God has put it on your heart is that he wants you to get involved in some way, whether that's by going or supporting people. So, yeah, there is need around us. But sometimes if you've got it really deeply on your heart to go overseas, don't get distracted by the needs around you. Follow God's call to go to the nations.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, there are many valuable callings here in our own home countries. But yeah, it's a good question to say, well, will somebody else step up and do that if I go overseas? And the answer is probably yes. There are plenty of other ministers and youth leaders and worship leaders who could do some of the good things we're involved with here. But very few people are willing to go to the ends of the earth. So if that's on your heart, it could well be from God. Okay, the third myth. Mission is everything we do, or everyone's a missionary. So how do we deal with that one?
Well, this is an issue of what the words mean. If we're talking about mission, what are we talking about? The word mission or missionary actually means someone who is sent. So there is some truth in the fact we're all missionaries, because actually all of us who follow Jesus as Lord and Savior, we're sent to the places where we're doing our normal lives to be his witnesses somewhere. But if we call everyone a missionary, we need to find a different name for people who give up the comforts of home to go to a strange culture and spend years learning the language and people who sometimes risk their lives to see that people get to hear about Jesus. People who focus all their efforts on making disciples. We kind of need a different definition for them. So yeah, in some ways we're all missionaries, but there's also a different category of people that are set aside to go to some of the hardest places on earth. And, it's so important that we look at Jesus' last words. The last words of someone are really important. And, when you look at the last things Jesus said to his disciples, he said, go and make disciples of all nations. That's how Matthew records it. Then Luke records it by saying, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. So the heart of missions is really about making disciples. So I'm not sure that missions is everything we do. The heart of missions is about making disciples and taking the gospel where it hasn't gone.
Yeah, someone said, I can't remember who it is now, if missions is everything, then missions is nothing.
That's right.
In Acts 13, we very clearly see the church of Antioch setting aside Paul and Barnabas, laying hands on them, sending them out, just as Jesus did with his disciples. So I think we have to, when we talk about mission, we have to think of not just the mission of God, which we're all part of, and that can be anything we do, as you just said, creation care, serving the poor, food banks, that's all part of the mission of God, the heart of God. But when we're talking about missions or setting people apart to go, that is another thing. So it's good to keep that as a distinction in our vocabulary somehow or in our practice, definitely.
Yeah, when we think about global missions, it's such a big task to reach the ends of the earth that actually we can all be involved in missions, and we should all be involved in missions in many ways. There's a shared responsibility. And so there are all kinds of ways to get involved, even if you're not going to go.
Yeah, that's really good. So instead of everyone's a missionary, everyone has a part in God's mission.
Exactly.
Would be a better way to do it. Or everyone can be involved in missions or global mission. Great. Okay, the fourth myth. Yeah, what about this? We should just send money to local evangelists out there because they're more effective than foreigners.
Well, there may be some truth in that, but I think we also need to go back to the scriptures, and again, when we look at the Great Commission, these last words of Jesus, which are really the launch pad for what we do in missions today. He told us to go, and essentially he's saying, keep on going. Go till the end of the age. He says, I will be with you till the end of the age. So the way I think we should understand global missions and taking the gospel to the ends of the earth is that it's for all of God's people for all time. It's not just for a few. It's not just for locals. And the most fruitful people might not necessarily be locals. It's not always obvious who the most fruitful people are. You've only got to read missionary biographies and listen to some of the stories on this podcast just to understand actually the people who God anoints are the people that are going to be the most fruitful and the most effective. And that's nothing to do with your passport. So yeah, people who have gone and really spent time learning the culture and language can be very fruitful in the places they go.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also this idea of, well, who are the local evangelists that we're talking about funding? Usually there aren't any in the places we're talking about because they're completely unengaged areas. So there are no local evangelists. There is no local church. Now, you might say, oh, well, geopolitically, yes, we have Indian Christians who could reach people in the north of India, Uttar Pradesh, Muslims there, for example. But we've chatted with Indian brothers on this podcast before, and they've made it very clear to us that, yeah, India is a continent. They're not local evangelists. If someone's going from the south of India to the north of India, they're crossing country after country after country effectively. And it's almost like someone coming from the Philippines to North India. The differences in food, language, culture, it's huge. So it's very easy to say, oh, a local evangelist can do that. But we need to break that down a bit and say, well, yeah, who exactly do you mean by local?
Yeah. So, in the larger countries, there are Christian areas and there are Muslim areas and there are Hindu areas or Buddhist areas or whatever. And often crossing those, you're actually a foreigner wherever you go in that setting. So it's not a simple answer just to pay local evangelists to do it. And I think there's also one probably even more important reason why that's not a good idea, just to rely on that, is that actually pioneering costs lives. And that's a serious thing. And so essentially, if we're saying, well, let's just send them money to do it, what we're saying is, well, let them take the risk. We're not going to put our lives in danger. We're not going to take any risk. Let them do it. We'll just send the money. But actually, working together with local believers, if they exist in a certain place, we're sharing in the blessing and we're sharing in the cost together. And both those things are true. So, yeah, we've got to be doing this together. If there are local believers, let's work together with them.
Definitely.
Let's mobilize them. Let's learn from them. Let's train them in what we know. But this is the wonderful thing about the church. It's all the nations coming together and serving God together to reach the rest.
Yeah, that's so good. Number 5, and this is one of those myths that can be very damaging in a sense of people finding their place in God's mission. And it's this: mission is the West to the rest. So just to explain that a little bit, there is this perception sometimes that mission came out of Western colonialism or Western countries.
Yeah, and it's probably been like that for too long. But again, there's good news that's happening today. You know, even in Frontiers, our organization here, what we're seeing is that a lot of other nations are starting to join and go to the nations. And one thing I love about Frontiers is we're actually sending people from 60 different countries to go to the Muslim world and pioneer. And actually one of our largest growing areas is South America right now. And the Brazilian sending base, they're talking about hundreds of young people who are considering God's call to go to the Muslim world, and they're training them up. And so this is really exciting. In fact, they're outdoing us, and we're in great danger actually in the West of getting left behind now, of missing out on what God is doing. You know, I mean, the great thing about the Great Commission is we know the end of the story, right? And so we know it's going to be successful. We know it's going to be fruitful. We know there's going to be a number that no one can count standing in white before the throne. And so it's just a question of, well, do we get involved or don't we get involved in what God's doing? And so the rest of the world seem to be getting involved, you know, and the rise of the global South, these other countries that are sending people to the nations. So that's really good.
Yeah, and just a word on this idea of it's a colonial project. Some people, just a few people, I think, in some of the universities, they've picked up this post-colonial angst, we sometimes call it. Oh, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing this because we're imposing something from a power background. But of course, the faith we follow is not a Western faith. This is a Middle Eastern savior, Jesus.
Exactly.
He was a Jew, and you know, this has nothing to do with a Western religion in many, many ways, even if it has grown here over the centuries. When we're speaking to Muslims, of course, that's quite an important fact to remember. We're not exporting something from the West.
Yeah, and in our training that we do for people who are going, we deal a fair bit with contextualization, which is actually thinking, what is the gospel? What is it for these people? That we're not importing our denominations, for example. I remember my old professor when I was at Bible college, he used to say, denominations, abominations. And he was talking in the context of taking our denominations to some of these unreached places and setting up churches in their countries as though they were in our countries, you know, with exactly the same model. You know, we should never take our denominations. I remember reading a quote by Mother Teresa once, and it was a beautiful quote. She said, "We must offer this living water, not from a Western cup, for people reject it because of its outer appearance, but from an Indian cup." And so as we present the gospel, yeah, we're presenting it in a cultural setting where we want them to take control. And one of the things I love about how we're doing things in Frontiers generally is we're not looking to go and set up a church and lead it. We're looking to start something, start these groups, these house churches that are starting to multiply and spread, and let locals lead them and do it in a way that's appropriate for their culture. And that's really exciting. So it's definitely not West to the rest. It's not a Western religion. This is Jesus for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that about how mission is playing out all over the world now, within Frontiers, but also in many other mission agencies. They're seeing the same thing. It's very much polycentric. I think they call it polycentric mission, coming from all the different areas of the world, going to where the gospel is most needed. Great. Okay, so those are our 5 myths about missions. And now we're going to look at 5 myths that hold us back sometimes concerning missionaries, the people who God uses around the world. So, number 6, missionaries are super spiritual people, and I'm not. And this is something I think so many of our young folks who come to us have in the back of their minds. I don't think I can do this. And they so often exclude themselves for a whole bunch of reasons. But it's around this idea of missionaries, amazing people of faith who pray all the time and evangelize all the time, and I just can't. So how would you counter some of that?
Well, Matt, are you super spiritual?
We know each other very well, so it's easy for us to think differently. No, I'm not. I'm so ordinary, and you know that.
Yeah.
We as missionaries, we struggle with our prayer lives at times. We wrestle with faith for God to provide sometimes, and despite seeing it so often. And of course, there are times in our lives we go through grief or dark nights of the soul, as everyone else does. So yeah, we're very, very ordinary people. That's one of the tags of the podcast, isn't it? Ordinary people serving an extraordinary God.
Yeah, and you've only got to read the Bible to see it's full of stories of God using really ordinary people for extraordinary work.
Mm.
You look at Moses, he was a murderer, super spiritual, right? He kind of ran away from Egypt. When God asked him to work for him, he kind of gave all these reasons not to. You look at Elijah, extraordinary miracles that he did, and yet he really struggled with depression, like a spiritual depression. The 12 disciples, they had a lot to learn. I mean, they were quite racist, even at the beginning of the book of Acts as they're going out. God has to really wake up Peter to realize that his job is to reach the Gentiles. So missionaries are not super spiritual people, but they are people who want the presence of God. And that's really important. And that's not just true of missionaries. It should be true of all of us disciples. We're people who want the presence of God, and we want it more and more in our lives. And so we're just a people that open our hearts to receive him and receive his loving presence with us. Wanting God's presence more and more is so vital. Missionaries are not super spiritual, but they're super committed. It takes a lot to get on that plane and go with no ticket to come back. So missionaries, they might not be super spiritual, whatever that means, but they are people that say, okay, I'm willing to give my life to serve Jesus wherever he wants me to go. And so it's just kind of having a willing spirit and an open heart to receive him and then walk with him through life. So don't discount yourself if you think I'm not spiritual enough. Actually, anyone can come to the place where they say, God, I want more of you. Jesus, I want you to send me wherever you'd have me go, and I want you to be with me.
I would actually say, if you have concerns that you're not pure enough, not holy enough, not spiritual enough, that's actually a healthy place to be. That's where Jesus meets us, isn't it? In forgiveness, in healing, in strengthening the weak. That's the one that Jesus loves to work with. He doesn't really want someone who says, I've got everything. I'm the best Christian out there. I'm going to go save the world. We should have a humble attitude. So it's okay to have those concerns, I suppose, at some point.
Yeah, that's right. And one of my colleagues here, he says, I think he's quoting someone else, but he says, never trust anyone who doesn't walk with a limp.
Yes.
And so, yeah, we're going to have these limps that we carry with us through life, the things that we carry, the scars from the past, but we walk with Jesus, and that's the important thing.
That's right. And we all carry the failures. Even Jesus himself, tempted in every way, yet without sin. How much more us humans, we struggle with the same things as everyone out there in the church. So yeah, let's pull down the pedestals. You mentioned a couple of biblical characters there. I love talking about Gideon. There's always the guy I think of when, I'm not strong enough. I'm not influential enough. I'm a weak person. I'm from a small clan and all of that. And I love also thinking about Isaiah and that amazing passage, Isaiah 6, where he just says, woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. I know there's a generation out there of young folks who are constantly bombarded and therefore worried about what they're seeing online and thinking about and the struggles they've had. But, Isaiah met with the Lord, and the Lord touched his lips with that burning coal and said, your guilt is taken away. Now go and serve me. I've got this message for you to take. So that's so important. Have you ever thought about your role in God's great mission to draw all people to himself? There are so many ways you could get involved, even if you don't end up overseas. You could share some of these episodes, introduce Raw Mission to your friends, and give us a 5-star rating or write us a review. You could become a regular partner too in this ministry, perhaps by giving £10 or £20 a month, enabling us to keep growing our team here and sending more labourers to the harvest. Or even join our team in the UK. We're often on the lookout for new staff, advocates and mobilisers around the country, or those of you with finance and administration gifts. Please do pause for a moment and ask the Lord what you could do, and then we'll get back to the interview. Number 7, what about this though? Missionaries are extraordinarily gifted people, and I'm not.
Well, I think probably any of us who go to the field, we might think we're gifted, but I think as soon as you land somewhere and you don't know the language and you don't know the culture, you realize actually I'm nothing. When we arrived in Turkey many years ago, I remember being on a bus and watching this 2-year-old talking to their mother and thinking that 2-year-old has far better communication skills than I do. Like, I am literally nothing. I don't have the skills to do what I've been called to do here. When we went overseas, I wanted to tell people about Jesus. I wanted to lead people to Jesus. I wanted to make disciples. I wanted to see churches start. But actually, before I went, I'd never led anyone to the Lord. And here I am, this so-called professional evangelist now. I'd never even seen a house church, let alone planted one. So do I have the skills to do what God is asking me to do in that country? Absolutely not. But one thing I do know is that when I saw fruit, and I did see fruit quite quickly with people coming to faith in Jesus, it had to be God that did it. And so when we talk about, do I have the right gifts for doing this work? Well, you need spiritual gifts. Natural talents serve us to a certain point, but the gifts that you need are spiritual gifts, and they're the things that God can give. And so when I started to see things happen where I was, it was only because God was at work. That's one thing. And I think the other thing just to realize is that so many different gifts are needed to see this work done. If you've got all evangelists on a team, then who's going to be caring for the team? Who's going to be caring for the new believers? We need people with pastoral gifts. We need people with administrative gifts. We need people with mercy gifts, serving gifts, all these kind of things. And this is the beautiful thing again about the church working together is God gives his gifts to the church, and he gives natural talents to people as well. And all these things are needed. So if you got a heart to go to the nations, please don't discount yourself on the fact that you haven't got the right gifts. God will give you the gifts you need when you need them.
Yeah, he is the one who equips. And that's not just the practical gifts, but he's the one who captures our hearts. Because some people think, well, I'm not that compassionate to go out there and love these strange people I haven't even met yet. But God also equips in that way. He'll touch our heart. He'll give us a love for the people we serve amongst. Some people think, oh, I'm not that bold. Well, the Lord will give you boldness. He said to his disciples the same, didn't he? I will give you the words to say in those situations. So we trust the Lord. It's not about, I have all these skills, I have all these gifts. No, it's about, will I receive from God in that moment what I need to be resilient? And some people think, oh, missionaries are so good at languages maybe, and I'm not. Well, actually, many of us aren't good at languages in our home countries, in schools, but we get out there and it's very different. It's a different situation, and we can learn because we're embedded in a culture that needs that language. And so we learn.
Yeah. I remember doing Latin at school, and I hated Latin, but they pinned the results up on the board. And I looked down the list. Well, I started probably about 2/3 of the way down to see where my name was, and kept going down. And I was bottom in the whole year with 22%. So you could have looked at that and said, well, he's really the wrong sort of person to go overseas and learn a new language. But then I went overseas and I loved learning the language, and I loved learning to be able to communicate with people. So yeah, don't discount yourself when you go overseas and start interacting with people. It's a lot more fun.
Definitely. And some people think, but I'm not an extrovert. I don't like being out with people all the time on the streets or just surrounded by crowds. And again, it's a bit of a myth. That's not what missionaries always do. We're not always out on the streets, always with people. There are plenty of introverted missionaries, but they play a role on the team that's so important, and no one else can do that. Their gifts are just right. Great. Okay, number 8. To be a missionary, you need a special call from God. Now, this is a big one, isn't it, Mike? So often people think, I haven't had the call. I haven't heard the voice. So how can we help people think a little more wisely and biblically about this issue?
Well, I think when we think of call, we need to define what we mean by call. I actually wrote an article on this a few years ago, and I asked lots of people that were on the field with Frontiers about their call. Like, what was your call like? And most people, the majority, didn't have a call, so to speak, from God, where they felt God say, clearly you should go to this place or this people group or anything like that. Most people who went, it was because they were bothered. They were bothered by the fact that they visited this place or heard about this place, and there's no followers of Christ there. There's no efforts to reach these people. And so I always think, in Frontiers, we are a community of people who are bothered. We're bothered that there's so many unreached people, but we're also people that say, well, I want to go and do something about it. I just think theologically, God does call certain people to certain things. And sometimes he speaks very clearly and very prophetically. But also God asks for volunteers. And, the book of Isaiah, when Isaiah is in the room with God and he's kind of overwhelmed by God's presence. And then God asks him a simple question. He says, who will go for us? And then Isaiah says, well, here am I, send me. And so there's plenty of room in the missions world for volunteers, people who say, okay, God, I want to go and do something about it.
Yeah.
I didn't have a call. I just had a girlfriend who wanted to be a missionary. And so she told me about that. And I thought about it for a few weeks. And then I thought, yeah, why not? And so that's how we started on our journey.
Yeah, we're not looking for people necessarily with ability. We're looking for availability.
How about you? What was it like for you?
Yeah, well, for me, it was a growing love for a part of the world. And on top of that, then hearing the statistics of how many were out of reach of the gospel. And I've always thought I'm not really deeply compassionate, compared to lots of folks I know, including my wife. But it definitely bothered me that so few people had no access to this amazing gospel that I, as a young Christian, aged 18, 19, had just tasted. And I was like, oh my goodness, this joy, this grace I've experienced, surely everyone in the world should be able to at least respond to this and choose this. And some people say you don't need a call when you have a command. What Jesus clearly said in the Gospels to his followers. Yeah. Okay, so then number 9. To be a missionary, I would have to give up my career to serve God.
Yeah, again, there might be some truth in that. Maybe you will have to give up something. Maybe you will have to count the cost to give up something to go. But actually, increasingly in the world we're in today, the modern world, people are taking their career with them. There's very few countries that we send people to that would offer a missionary visa. So a lot of people are taking their career overseas. And obviously with the internet, a lot of people are doing jobs online that they can take with them. But even if you do take your career overseas, you might have to give up your small ambitions to get a lot of money and buy your big house and your big car and have a comfortable retirement, these kind of things. And so just getting involved in missions, it does mean counting the cost and being willing to lay down things and trust God for the future.
Yeah, that's good. For me, I chose a career that would lead towards serving God overseas. So that's one way that people go. Find something that you would enjoy. I didn't just choose a random career that, okay, that's great for overseas, so I'll do that. No, I think our own desires and skills and background should be counted and thought about very carefully, and we bring that before the Lord. But often the Lord, I think, meets us in that. And wherever we're going, he'll find, okay, well, what are you passionate about, good at, and what are the needs out there? And it's where those things meet together. That's where we want to be in many ways. So it might be your career that you're using as you're out on a church planting team, but it might be a hobby. Yes, you might leave your career behind, but actually your hobby comes to the surface, and you could do something in sports perhaps, or do something in creation care that, is very integrated with God's mission and the church planting efforts overseas.
Yeah, we've got all kinds of people, haven't we, that we've seen come through and go to the field. We've got teams of artists, and they just go around as artists and photographers, doing various things. And we got people that are digging wells, so that people have access to fresh water and all kinds of things. So whatever your heart is, whatever your passion is, whatever your career is, there is a place for you somewhere.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's also a case of just trusting Jesus with his words. He said, everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. And sometimes we might apply that verse to people that have had to give up these things because they've come to faith in Jesus. They've been rejected by their family. But also this verse is true for people that are giving up things at home to go to the nations, to go overseas. And it's just an issue, well, do we really believe the promises of God that Jesus will give us 100 times as much in this life and in the life to come? And, one of the things I loved looking back, because obviously I'm back in the UK now, but we spent many years overseas, is we did give up family, and that was really hard. And there was a risk of being lonely, and there was a risk of joining a team of people that we wouldn't get on with. But actually, when we were on that team overseas, it was the most beautiful, godly community we can imagine. And our kids had friends on the team that became like their family. And I remember my daughter being bridesmaid for another girl on the team, even though she lived in a different country now. And then when my daughter got married, she came and was bridesmaid for my daughter. There's all these things that God gave us in return. And he promises to look after us.
Yeah.
You know, there were times when we had no idea how to pay for our kids' education when they were really struggling in local schools. We had to put them in a private school, but God always provided, and there was always enough for us. So, yeah, having to give up things to serve God overseas, it's just a case of, well, do I trust God that he can provide? And I'm talking to someone who's been doing this for more than 30 years, and there's always been enough for our family, sometimes miraculously. But the cool thing is our kids also have these amazing stories that they carry of God's provision for them. And so I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, that's a good word. I like that, because earlier we were talking about this idea that I'm not enough. I can't do this. And now we're talking about, will I have enough, joy or the things that I like, and I'm worried about giving that up. But actually, God is enough at the end of the day for all of this, isn't he? He is our strength. He is our provision. He is our identity. And so, yeah, all of this is actually an extension of discipleship.
That's right.
If you're worried about giving up your career, go back to the foot of the cross. Are you willing to give up your life first and foremost to follow Jesus? Then career is not such a big deal.
That's right.
Okay. And then the final one, missionaries have to live in mud huts. Well, what do we mean by that? I think there is this idea out there sometimes that if you're going to be a global worker overseas somewhere, you will be living amongst the poor. You will be living in a mud hut or in the desert, and you won't have running water, and you won't have electricity, and you might not have internet. And I think, people have this idea that missionaries are always in a very poor situation. Yeah. How would you answer?
Well, I think we can only answer from our experience. I mean, my experience is we could have afforded to live in a very luxury place because the rents were so much cheaper there than we were paying in the UK. And we could have lived in a very poor place, but we chose to live somewhere in the middle as a team just because we thought it would make more sense to people. And we didn't want to live in such a place that the poor wouldn't come to us. So we just chose deliberately where we should live. But the idea of kind of mud huts, pith helmets, big Bible under the arm, and machete, working your way through the jungle, that's something from the past, those pioneers that went out maybe 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that's not the picture today. So what was your mud hut like in Pakistan, Matt?
Well, I lived in a few different houses over the years in Pakistan, but yeah, I never lived in the classic mud hut. I mean, actually in the mountains, our roof did have mud built into it, but that was brilliant. It was much cooler in the hot summers, and it was much warmer in the cold winters. Some of the modern buildings are all just built with concrete out there, and they're terrible for insulation, and the heat stays in the house. It's just unbearable. So actually sometimes there's a real benefit of living with some mud around your house. But no, I always had electricity. Yeah, I had Eastern toilets, not Western toilets sometimes. I mean, I say I always had electricity at least one day out of 3. Sometimes there were power cuts and all sorts of things. But no, we were not living in a terrible situation. We were absolutely living like sort of a teacher would live in Pakistan. So I was teaching at the university, and I was living in a normal kind of house that a teacher out there would live in. So like you say, kind of matching my position in the community there. And some people would choose to live even more simply than that, and that's great. But I think one of the key things I want to draw out from this point is the places where the gospel is needed are not just the poor places in the world. Saudi Arabia is very different to Afghanistan. Now, those two are equally needy countries for the gospel, but utterly opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of wealth and poverty. So we need folks who will go and live in megacities, fancy cities, and they might have to buy a decent car to get around and all the rest of it. But others might be more willing and more able to go and live amongst the poor. And, we have friends, don't we, in some places around the Horn of Africa where, really tough, challenging, poor situations, but they're thriving there and their kids love it. I mean, you've been there and visited.
Yeah, that's right. And so as we have people come to us and say, I'm considering going to the nations, or I think God might be calling me to go, we have these discussions like, what kind of place could you go to? What kind of place could you live in? Would it be an urban place, or would it be a very rural place? You're the sort of person at the weekend that goes to the mall, goes shopping, and the cinema, or you're the sort of person that goes and does wild camping.
Exactly.
And so like looking at, well, how has God made you? What kind of place could you go and live in? So we got some people that come to us and they really want to go and live in tough places, and they want to go and live not just serving the poor, but live among the poor and give their lives for the poor.
Yeah.
And then we got others who are going to actually very wealthy places, and sometimes they have very good jobs in those countries, but they're there to make disciples. And so all kinds of people, you know, the world is becoming more middle class than it's ever been before. You know, there are stats out there about the fall of poverty in the world. And so the world of missions has changed. It's not just rich going to poor. It's actually people going everywhere. So the idea of missionaries living in mud huts is something from the past. There will be a few that kind of choose to live that lifestyle, but many now are going to be going to middle class, educated, very wealthy places in some cases.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, guys, we hope this has been really useful for you as we've tried to tackle some of these myths, 5 myths about missions and 5 myths about missionaries. And there may be plenty of others out there, things out there that you think about, I couldn't do mission because it's like that, or because I'm like this. So yeah, why not write into me, matt@frontiers.org.uk, with any confusion you have around what exactly is mission these days. Do write into me and engage in some of this conversation. Perhaps we'd love to hear your thoughts and your opinions, your ideas, and some of the challenges or obstacles that might hold you back or hold your church back from sending. And keep praying with us that many more will be willing from all the nations of the world to go to the nations that have the least access to the gospel. Thanks, Mike, for being with me today. I've really enjoyed this chat, and hopefully it's great fuel for thinking for many of our listeners.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for being with us today, guys. As we close, I want to offer you a gift. It's an invitation to come and join in with the mission of God. The Lord asks in Isaiah, "Who will go? Whom shall I send?" Could it be you? Might you be willing to lay it all down, to give up everything for the one who gave up everything for you, to join one of our teams in the Gulf, in Africa, in Asia, the Balkans or the Caucasus, or to support some of our work through prayer or finances? If your heart is stirred to respond, do reach out to us, matt@frontiers.org.uk. And here's a great quote to end with from Billy Graham. To build our evangelistic policies on near-neighbor evangelism alone is thus to shut out at least 1 billion people from any possibility of knowing the Savior. God bless, and do join us next time. And one last thing, if you're in the UK, we would love to see you at our annual conference day, which is happening on Saturday the 8th of November in High Wycombe, Buckinghamshire. It's a great chance to connect with us, meet workers and hear their stories, and get equipped to reach out to your Muslim neighbours and friends. To book, go to our events page on our website, frontiers.org.uk.